Today's video has been sponsored by Sins of a Solar Empire 2, which is out now on Steam. Grab this sequel to one of the best ever space strategy games to battle over moving star systems as one of 3 distinct factions: the Tech, Vasari, and Advent, each with their own pair of sub-factions, with their own special mechanics and unique super ships called Titans. Huge quality of life improvements let you manage your large-scale assets with ease, letting you focus on the moving planets and shifting phase lanes that make up the battlefield, or zoom right in on the highly detailed combat simulation to do things like block missiles or outmaneuver the slow turrets of your enemies. It's also very mod-friendly, with an in-game mod browser that's fully integrated into the up to 10-person multiplayer, keeping everyone automatically synced with the same mods. Get Sins of a Solar Empire 2 today on Steam by clicking the link in the description and pinned comment below. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Joanna and today we're looking at the reasons why and where space battles might take place. Now, it is true that largely this comes down to the needs of the plot, which is mostly fine, but if things are particularly egregious, then the way the battle happens can end up feeling kind of contrived. Or perhaps it doesn't quite fit into the setting if you think about it, even if the battle itself was actually done really well. There needs to be a reason for armies or fleets to clash in any particular location, and if this isn't communicated to the audience, it can be a bit weird. Like the space chase in The Last Jedi, which did have a reason for happening seemingly in the middle of nowhere, but that reason wasn't communicated to the audience, or even their characters, until later in the movie. It just comes across as unnecessary and confusing. As many issues as it has, the Battle of Zahir in Season 2 of Discovery did have good justification for being set far away from anything. In this case, the strategic location the battle is around is the Discovery itself, so Pike orders that and the Enterprise away from Zahir to not pull the planet into the upcoming fight. Operation Return in Season 6 of Deep Space Nine is a fantastic and interesting battle, but it happened in a bit of a weird place. Starfleet's task force was making a bold move to retake DS9 in order to regain control of the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant, but for some reason they dropped out of warp on the edge of the system. It was very sporting of them to do that and meet the much larger enemy fleet awaiting them. Why didn't they just warp right past them? And this seems to be a bit of a trend in 90s Star Trek, as the Battle of Wolf 359 has exactly the same problem. The Borg cube drops out of warp for basically no reason, so Borg Picard can request an escort to Earth. But, why would the Borg care about that in the slightest? It kind of meets the Borg's modus operandi of attempting to intimidate a target into compliance, but it also goes against the goal of the cube itself to reach Earth. As for the Starfleet ships the cube wipes out, I suppose they were mustering there ready to fight it after forcing it out of warp, just like the Enterprise managed to do earlier. It's a desperate move given the extreme power that Borg cubes have, but what else can they do? I think these issues, and why we as an audience actually overlook them, is the way Star Trek battles are all built around emulating how a wet navy moves and fights. They can't just warp straight past an enemy, they always have to slowly move around and may be intercepted before reaching an actual place. This means battles could take place seemingly in the middle of nowhere, but that doesn't really gel with the setting that has faster than light travel. FTL tech that's built into a ship and works anywhere, so hyperdrives, warp, that sort of vibe, generally prevents this sort of ocean interception from happening because ships can just fly right on by a fleet trying to stop them, or be able to leave a battle with ease if they do somehow get engaged. That's where interdictor tech comes in, either to stop an enemy from entering FTL or to even force them out of it and into a trap. The first of those is pretty common to see, especially in games. EVE Online has a bunch of examples from ship-to-ship warp scramblers to big bubbles that cover a wide area, and are a foundational element of pretty much the entire player versus player gameplay of that game. The interdictor vessels in Star Wars do much the same thing with their gravity well projectors preventing ships jumping to hyperspace, but they're also capable of pulling them out of hyperspace too. Such vessels can be used to force a sudden engagement, or simply to police common travel routes. The other style of being forced out of FTL is the in-warp intercept, where one ship catches up to and blasts the other's engines. Plenty of examples of this too, but the Battle of Basin Rift in Star Trek Nemesis also ends up happening basically in the middle of nowhere because of this interception. So it is viable for nowhere battles to happen in a sensible manner when the setting actually makes smart use of the technology it has. I've already briefly mentioned EVE, but space games in general are very good at naturally funneling people into battles, since, well, that's kind of the point of them. One of the most popular options, particularly in space strategy games, is some variety of hyperlane. These are set routes between planets or solar systems that craft must travel along, and importantly, once on one of these lanes, ships can't do anything else while they travel, forcing battles to take place only at the strategic locations these lanes connect. This naturally funnels action in the game through known choke points, letting players prepare their defences or plan a route of attack without the messiness and unpredictability that comes from fully free-form movement. It's kinda important that strategy games have strategy after all. The other thing that happens with hyperlanes, and also gate-based FTL methods, is that conflict gets focused around the access points themselves. They're supremely vital for basically everything, from trade to intel to warfare, so controlling them is just as vital. That means settings with this type of FTL are going to be naturally filled with battles with fantastic justification, especially those focusing on control of the gates themselves. The one exception is those times in games where you sorta YOLO it and have bad intel and accidentally run into the enemy fleet when arriving in a system, falling into a massive, unexpected point-blank brawl. Those sort of fights are kinda fun in games, but smashing two giant fleets into each other at this sort of range in other media is the quick and dirty option, and visually can be a complete mess outside of the initial clash. There needs to be a reason for such a furball happening. No one is going to commit their forces to something so chaotic and risky without great cause. One option is to have the weaker force try to find and pick open a vulnerability in their opponent. Like in Operation Return, Cisco is forced into playing a game of strikes and feints against Ducat's much more powerful forces, which ultimately doesn't work, and then things descend into a big desperate mess. And that's also exactly what you have to do in the early to mid-game in Star Sector, particularly when you start a colony and need to deal with one of the main factions coming to see what you're up to. Taking on 15 big fleets at once is a lost cause, but with careful positioning it's possible to take on stragglers or outlying groups and grind down the whole thing over time. Hit and run tactics, but on a larger scale. Another good example of a justified furball is at the end of Return of the Jedi. Lando suggests to Admiral Akbar that the Rebel fleet engage the Imperial fleet at point-blank range, so as to avoid being one-shot by the Death Star. It's dangerous and they're sure to be destroyed eventually, but they need to buy time for the ground team to bring down the Death Star's shield. It's a great justification for the way that battle goes and makes it feel appropriately desperate. At the end of the day, you don't actually need to go through the effort of ticking every single box for justifying where and how a battle takes place. You just need to hit enough of them to make things feel right. Like those big Star Trek battles I mentioned earlier. Yeah, there's some minor issues, but everything else is so good that the audience never even notices the problems. The immediate plot is far more important to get right, and if that's engrossing and makes sense, then the other problems don't even really matter. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate and space fighter design reference books. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.